It's very problematic. When you look within the details of this plan, they don't even get to disarm. And so how on earth, honestly, I'm telling you, it's a Sophie's choice. I'm not saying this is a simple thing, because the hostages is very important for Israel, because Israel sanctifies every life, because we're going to have to release murderers with blood on their hands, people who've killed multiple Israelis in terrorist attacks, in order to get our hostages, and they can't even give us proof of life.
President Biden's peace proposal for Gaza is exposing the fragility of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition. Two far-right ministers are threatening to collapse the government if Netanyahu agrees to the ceasefire plans. He is, though, getting support from one of Israel's most influential opposition leaders, Yair Lapid. So what will Netanyahu do? Let's speak to Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. She's Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and is in charge of foreign relations. Fleur, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks very much for being with us. It's good to speak to you. Why wouldn't Netanyahu accept this deal and end the war and end the violence now?
Well, the thing is that everything hinges on this. Does Hamas, a terrorist genocidal organization that started the worst massacre against Jewish people since the Holocaust, that have said that they want to do this again and again, just give them the capabilities, do they stay on their feet at the end of this war? That's all it hinges on. And according to Biden's deal, and some people can interpret it this way or that way, they keep their arms and they keep their authority. Now, that's very problematic. You have to understand, imagine if you had a border with Osama bin Laden, and after 9/11, they're asking you, well, just let it go. And that's really what is happening here. On the other hand, we need to get our hostages home. It's just inconceivable that 132 hostages, we know at least 30, 40 already dead. There's a one-year-old child, a 4-year-old child, their mother. We don't know whether they're alive or dead, but Israel's spirit cannot continue with these people in there. And that's really the only reason to even consider this plan.
In terms of what you're outlining there, Fleur, a lot of that does seem within reach of this plan, doesn't it? And there are 3 phases, beginning with a full and complete ceasefire over 6 weeks. That would include the withdrawal of Israeli forces from densely populated areas of Gaza and the return of some hostages, including Americans, alongside the release of some Palestinian prisoners. Then the second phase would involve the release of all hostages and a permanent cessation of hostilities, combined with a full withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. And then the third phase relates to the reconstruction of Gaza to try to lead to some sort of stabilisation in the Middle East. Where does this plan fall down? Because I'm looking at the language around full and complete ceasefire, for example. So that would be incumbent on both sides, including Hamas, to respect the ceasefire.
Yes, we had a ceasefire on October 6th as well from the year before, and one the year before. Can you really trust these homicidal, genocidal terrorists to actually keep a deal in which they're saying that the very raison d'etre of their living is the destruction of Israel, where they're not going to do that? It's very problematic. When you look within the details of this plan, they don't even get to disarm. And so how on earth, honestly, I'm telling you, it's a Sophie's choice. I'm not saying this is a simple thing, because the hostages is very important for Israel, because Israel sanctifies every life, because we're going to have to release murderers with blood on their hands, people who've killed multiple Israelis in terrorist attacks, in order to get our hostages, and they can't even give us proof of life. We don't even know who's alive or dead. In fact, in one of the stages of the plan, they said, we're going to release 32 hostages. If we can't find them alive, we'll send them dead. What is that?
So then, I suppose, Fleur, the question comes down to what is there that's left to achieve? Now, obviously, journalists are not allowed into Gaza, and so we depend on reporting from around the area and indeed from aid agencies. But the suggestion is that Israel have really worked their way through basically almost the entirety of the territory, including into Rafah on the southern border of the Gaza Strip at this point. So what is there that's left militarily to achieve?
The 700 kilometers of tunnels. It's double the London Underground. That's what they've got under there. And they've got arms in there. They've probably got our hostages in there. They have the capability to keep attacking us. It's like they've got a whole other city under the Gaza Strip. And so, how can Israel leave a clear and present and existential threat to just continue over there? That's our problem. We had a ceasefire on October 6th, and look what happened.
Is it fair to say that the existential threat existed on October the 6th?
Yes, it did. We just didn't see it.
And had
I
Israel had
think that,
ambitions of removing the existential threat before that? I suppose what I'm guessing at in a roundabout way is, does the existential threat always exist? Is there a way to remove the ideology of Hamas terrorism? Or is this a reality of the region?
let's just go back a second.
Yeah.
In 2005, we left the Gaza Strip. We no longer occupy the Gaza Strip. We brought back 8,000 Israelis. We closed down their businesses. They were all farmers. And we thought, here, this is a contiguous piece of land that the Palestinians can start building a state. They can be autonomous. And indeed, they were autonomous. And at the beginning, it was Fatah, which is the Palestinian Authority. And then they were brutally kicked out by Hamas, who, of course, never had an election again, 17 years, and, treated their people terribly. There's no rights for women. There's no right for LGBTQ. And yet still, Israel was trading and Israel was providing work permits in the hope that if we can improve their lot economically, then maybe they will just accept that we're not going anywhere and that we can live peacefully with a two-state solution or a statelet next to our state, whatever it is that they wanted to develop there. That was conventional wisdom. We used to allow Qatar to bring suitcases of dollars and money, and it was almost like we were paying protection money for quiet. But every single year we had rockets. We had a mini war, 4 days, 5 days, 2 weeks at the most. They threw rockets. We kind of destroyed some rocket launchers, and then everybody said, stop. We stopped and we continued with this false conception that somehow we could just pay for quiet. And what we didn't realize is how poisonous this jihadi Islamic fundamentalism actually is.
Yeah. And just my final question, Fleur, while we're speaking to you this morning, is this deal has been kind of proposed, has been worked on by the US, by Egypt, by Qatar. I'm just wondering if they actually have a lot less influence over this situation than people had perhaps considered.
You mean Egypt and Qatar?
And the US, because this announcement clearly was made by President Biden, but it seems like Netanyahu's not willing to go with it. So actually, is it about a diminished level of influence on the part of those three allies? Is it about Netanyahu choosing to ignore them? What's going on there, do you think?
Well, I think that there's a lot going on. And you have to understand that the Americans are going into an election season. I think the last thing that Biden wants is the war raging in Gaza, which has not been good for his numbers whilst he's running for election. I think that's part of the stress to finish this off now. I think Qatar they're playing a very clever double game. They're both the arsonists and the fire extinguishers. And Egypt, if Egypt wanted to be helpful, all they had to do is open their border and open a temporary shelter for those people in Gaza, but they don't want any of it. They've built 3 walls. So I don't understand what their game is, but it will be very difficult for Israel to accept a deal when Hamas is still on its feet.
Thousands of protesters have been demonstrating in Israel, urging the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to sign a ceasefire proposal that was put forward by the US. Organisers claimed more than 120,000 people took part in a rally in Tel Aviv. Zach Anders covers the Middle East for us and joins us this morning. Hi, Zach.
Hi, good morning.
Good to speak to you. So, the protests have been a frequent occurrence, but surely they have an added potency given this very sort of clear path to a cessation of hostilities that was presented by President Biden.
Yeah, and I'll paint the picture for what these look like every Saturday night. The hostage families will give speeches at this permanent stage that's been set up outside of the Art Museum in central Tel Aviv that's across from one of the IDF headquarters. And this is Hostage Square is a permanent fixture since October 7th. So the crowd will grow there. The hostage families will give speeches, which we saw again last night, calling for an end to the war, calling for a ceasefire deal. And then when that crowd reaches its critical pitch, It then begins marching, and an insanely huge crowd yesterday, 120,000 people, continued to move towards the highway, threatening to shut down the road there, which is something they often do. The police say that as many as 14 police officers were injured last night as well, trying to keep the crowd out of the road. So it really did reach another pitch last night.
Yeah. In terms of the deal, it seems like Netanyahu has sort of, well, I don't know if he's outright rejected it himself, but he's certainly getting pressured from those around him, suggesting that this is not the time to actually go for this. What's your take on what's happening within the Israeli government?
Yeah, I think we see both sides of this issue filtering out with their messengers. Netanyahu beneath him, a lot of conflicting statements being made by some of the men inside his administration. Sunday Times had Ophir Falk saying that this is that Israel's not going to reject the deal, that the framework that President Biden has put forward is, quote, a deal we agreed to. However, he's also quoted in another source as saying, quote, it's not a good deal, but we dearly want the hostages released, all of them. There's another senior level source that told us, quote, Israel's condition for the end of the war have not changed, destroying Hamas. There's military and civil capabilities, freeing the hostages, and ensuring that Gaza will no longer represent a threat to Israel. This is a lot of the stuff that we've heard before, but off the record, there's a lot more undercurrent here saying, you know, the deal isn't all that different, and let's take this all with a grain of salt, be very cautious, because going forward, the ball really does seem like it's in Hamas's court. You've got Netanyahu again saying yesterday that this won't lead to a permanent ceasefire, that the end of Hamas is still in sight. And again, this is what collapsed the deal in early May. Hamas is not positioning itself, has not agreed to any sort of framework that's going to lead to them no longer being the government inside Gaza. So they also are pushing for the permanent ceasefire. This is what collapsed the deal back on in that first week of May. So really, you're getting a lot of conflicting statements from inside these Netanyahu government sources, but how can there possibly be a deal to be had, again, when you've got two sides that have made it very clear that an end to the war is not what they're going to agree to?
Yeah. It sort of brings us round, I suppose, then to the fighting itself, Zach, because I wonder if the end to the war is the end to the war. And by that, I mean Netanyahu does not want to stop until there is quite simply nothing left to fight.
Yeah, and I think this government is starting to fully realize what that looks like financially. You've got one of the ministers, the financial minister, Smotrich, who's threatening to leave the government, has been the one that's putting out some of these figures about the billions that it's going to cost Israel to continue to remain inside Gaza, to have 100,000 plus reservists called into active duty. And there's still no plan for who could possibly be the administrative government. Say you do collapse Hamas, which by all accounts is still well in control of certain of the large urban areas of the Gaza Strip. At least there's a vacuum there that has not been replaced. And if you are to continue on this route, this campaign inside Gaza, well, the Israeli government's estimating that publicly, they're saying it's going to take another 7 months of active fighting inside the Gaza Strip. But behind closed doors, they're speaking in terms of years, that this is going to be something that continues to stretch on, particularly with the ability of actually eliminating a insurgent terrorist organization that is underground. They still haven't even found all of the tunnel entrances yet. And they say that that's an effort that's completely mapping this tunnel system is going to be one of the main priorities going forward, but also an extreme challenge as they're fighting their way through these tunnels that are booby trapped and killing and injuring some of their soldiers as well. So this is a long road ahead. Israel's really recognizing that, and publicly they're starting to make sure that the Israeli public understands that going forward, this is going to be a long road. If you can't get a hostage deal done now, then this is a conflict that will stretch out for, Israel publicly says, at least another 7 months, but likely for more, another year, possibly even more.